Hey everybody, this is the fourth here, and in this video I wanted to talk about effect chain order in the mixer. And the reason I haven't really talked about effect chain order yet in this tutorial series is because the effects that I've introduced you to in the previous sections don't really work off of each other in such a way that it would cause a very drastic change in the final result of your sound depending on the order of those effects. So for example, if you were to put some reverb on a sound and then put some EQ on that sound after the reverb, it's not going to sound drastically different than if you had used that EQ before the reverb. But now that we're getting into tools like compression and other dynamic tools, distortions, saturation, the order of effects really does start to matter quite a bit. And just like everything else in mixing, there's no right order, there's no wrong order. It's all about what you're trying to achieve. And the main point of this video is just to pay attention to what you're doing and why you're doing it, and whether or not the order that your effects are in allows you to achieve that desired result in a proper way. So, for example, if I have this rim shot sound here, you can hear that it has a little bit of a tail on it. And maybe I don't want that tail to be as present. So I can use, a noise gate to kind of gate out that tail. And just tighten up the sound. Now, let's say that I also want to put some reverb on it though. If I put the reverb on after the noise gate, you can hear that it plays just fine. It sounds pretty nice, a nice reverb on that rim sound, and it sounds good. But if I were to put this reverb on before the noise gate, it still changes the sound. You can hear the difference between the dry sound and the sound with the reverb on. But you can hear that the reverb tail is cut short because of the noise gate. And if I add an oscilloscope, you can see this a little bit better. You can probably hear it anyway, but you can see with the reverb before the noise gate, it cuts out very quickly. But if I have the reverb on after the noise gate, you can see that there's a longer tail, and that tail is just the reverb. And so neither of these is wrong, It sounds fine like this. And it also sounds great like this. It really all comes down to what kind of sound you want, what you're trying to achieve, and what sounds good to you. But you can hear that the order of these effects really changes the final result. And this happens with EQ as well. Because you can see on the oscilloscope, here's how the sound sounds normally. You can see that it has a very specific kind of dynamic range to it. The amplitude varies in a very specific way throughout that drum sample. But if I add some EQ on it and do, various adjustments using that EQ, you can see that the dynamics of that sound are affected when I use this EQ. So because that EQ is changing the dynamics of the sound, it will affect the results if I were to compress it. So if I were to compress it after the EQ, I would get a certain kind of result, but if I were to compress it before the EQ, I would get a different kind of result. And the best way to demonstrate this is with a white noise filter sweep. So let's say that I didn't want all of that low end as present in that filter sweep. So I would kind of high pass that out. And I could make various other adjustments to really get the kind of sound that I wanted exactly. But now let's look at what happens if I compress it. So just to really give a good example of this, I'm going to compress it pretty hard and pretty extreme settings. And you can hear that what this compression has done is it's kind of canceled out what I've done with the EQ. And if you look at what's happened an oscilloscope when I play this sound with just the EQ on, you can see that the dynamics are changing quite a bit. It starts off a lot louder and fades out. But when I compress it, what happens is it doesn't fade out as much. And so basically me removing that lower end is kind of partially negated by this compressor, because I was reducing the amplitude when it gets into those lower frequencies, but now with the compressor I am bringing that amplitude back up by a certain amount. And if I compress it before the EQ, you'll see that the result is very different. So that's kind of an extreme example, and I wanted to give an extreme example because it really helps you to understand it a lot better. Because, even with less extreme examples, it will change the final result of the sound if you change the order of your effects. And, just like everything else, there's no wrong way to do it, there's no right way to do it. It's all about what sounds good, what sounds right to you. But it's definitely something to pay attention to make sure that you're not, cutting certain frequencies out of a sound and then bringing them back in by using some really hard compression or anything like that. So that's kind of it for this video. If you want to, you can definitely do more research about effect chain order in mixing and specific techniques regarding the effect chain order. Something that I've heard before is boost before compression. Like if you're going to EQ, boost before compression and cut after compression. But I personally, don't always do that. Sometimes I'll do that. That's just an example of something that I've heard that is some advice. But just like every piece of advice, it's not going to work right in all cases. It's not going to be right for all people. But knowing about it is useful. And yeah. So hopefully this video is helpful. Hopefully you now have a little bit of an understanding of how the effect chain order can produce different results in the final output. And regarding how you should, have your effect chain set up, it's very much up to you. And it's very much up to the sound that you want to achieve. And the best thing you can do is play around with it and, get familiar with how different effect chain orders affect the final results.